Hello everybody, this is C1 and I welcome you to a new little series we're going to be doing on the channel, which is called Dead Game Review or Dead Games Review. It is basically all about reviewing games that have died out or are dying out or are dead, but basically by the developers' hands themselves. We're going to be talking about why the game should or should not be restored to its former glory, and we're going to be going over some little gems that you may have missed while they were alive. Today's topic should be on the screen, should be an image, hopefully, of the Worlds Adrift game. So, Worlds Adrift was a game that was created by Bossa Studios, the same people who made I Am Bread and Surgeon Simulator, and it was kind of like a side project that they were doing. The game was a MMO where you and as many people as you choose to accept into your crew could go flying about the skies, building different kinds of ships for different needs, combating with other players if you so choose to, and just surviving in general in the world. So, what is there to say about this game? Well, the game was in early access. It never left early access. There were a lot of changes, a lot of fixes, a lot of stuff added. But in 2017, 2018, maybe even 2019, it got shut down for not being able for them not being able to keep funding on it. So it was a big project. It was worked on by several people, and it was well done. Everything about it was great. There was some janky physics, but sometimes that just played to your advantage in the game. What was the story? There wasn't a story. The story was built by the community itself. When you bought Worlds Adrift, or a early access code to Worlds Adrift, you got the ability to access a thing called the Island Creator, which is where you could build your own islands and submit them to the devs to possibly get put into the game. So every single island that was put into the game after its initial early access release, more likely than not, was created by a person. At least most of them were. Some of them were created by the devs themselves because they were early games islands. And this game got looked over by many. It got reviewed once by the Yogscast a long time ago, and it never really left my mind from that point on until I was finally able to afford it. Now, what the game lacked in a story, it made up for with customizability of your ships, designs, and the amount of exploration you could do. Each island had its own story made by the creator of the island to tell. Some were just simple little pieces of land pulled up from the broken world and left floating in the sky. Other ones were complete chunks of civilizations lost to time. And I think that really drove a big driving force behind the game's development, like people developing stuff in it at least. But the game, although it lacked story, it had a lot of different things, like the customizability. So when you start off with the game, you eventually got a tutorial, but you were basically thrown into a world, no clue what to do other than just little tooltips that were given to you. You kind of had to figure it out for yourself, build certain things, collect certain things, so on and so forth, which didn't hurt the game, actually. It helped people like me over time build up a knowledge of how the game worked and what you could do with it. But the game developers kind of, after long enough, put in a tutorial to teach you how to play the game. But yeah, basically your goal at the beginning of the game was just collect materials so that way you could build yourself a ship dock and start building your first ship. The designs of the ships could vary so much, so it was ridiculous. But you always had to worry about weight. It was a big factor in it. A bigger ship means a weightier ship. Depending on the materials and the weight of the materials that were used to build it, it could be a really heavy ship or a very light ship. Usually the heavier the ship was, the better materials could be used or were used in the creation of the process. You want a big ship, you gotta find the right materials for it. The lightest of the hardest materials for the most protection. Now, after the initial game's launch, there was some upgrades given to your ability to make your ships that you had to find out in the world. Upgrades that could increase your capacity depending on what materials you used to create them, almost up another 1,000 kilos. It was ridiculous. But as I said, the designing capability of the ships was very unlimited. Like, it was mostly creativity and how you could finagle parts to work together. Perfect example is when I played the game, we ended up making a ship so small and so compact and so, like, niche in its design that not only could it do, like, full-on backflips, but, like, this thing could outmaneuver the best of, like, ships. It did mean some of its very important parts were somewhat vulnerable, but maneuverability equals less likely to get hit anyway. On top of having a good pilot, you're pretty much golden. But that's enough of the ranting about when I was playing the game for right now. Let's get back to the early game. So early game, the game wanted you to build a ship. You build your ship, you don't have any engines. You only have a sail, you have a steering wheel and a sail, and you just go with the wind pretty much. You could open and close the sails, so on and so forth. But yeah, it was all very much just drift with the winds, which could be positive or could be negative, depending on how you designed it. Most ships, although most people just didn't need them, had sails on them for the very likelihood of what could happen, what would happen. Because, as you will hear in just a moment, the game was sectioned off into certain chunks. Each chunk had a tier to it. So your basic tier 1 stuff was all in the tier 1 area, which is all a place where you could naturally spawn in, no problem. Tier 2 was a little bit harder. See, to get to tier 2s, you need to be able to get through these magical storm walls called wind walls. These are the lowest tier of the storm wall, and they were difficult because basically in order to get through them you need to be able to outpull the wind's drag down on you, because the wind would push you literally down into the void and out of the storm. And 2, you had to be able to make sure that your ship wouldn't get attacked when you were doing so. It's not always the easiest to do if you're in a PvP server, but it was doable. Then you have the tier 3s. Tier 3s, they're a little bit higher. So tier 1s could be separated by wind walls. Tier 2s would also normally be separated by wind walls. But there were a few tier 2s that connected to the tier 3s. Most of those tier 2s connected to tier 3s had storm walls. Storm walls were pretty bad. They're bad in a weird sense. So storm walls, unlike wind walls, are not only very cranky with the way that their wind blows, but they're also very hostile. Lightning strikes, damaging your ship parts, lighting your ship on fire, so on and so forth. Not a good time. In order to get through those, you had to have preferably heavy materials to block the lightning damage, and hopefully non-exposed motors and stuff, so you weren't likely to lose anything. If you did, you'd probably get kicked right out. Once again, the wind was cranky, being more so instead of dragging you down, it'd throw you whatever way it felt like. And then there's the tier 3 areas, or in some people's cases, tier 4 areas. Tier 3/4 areas were mostly separated by an entire surrounding of a sand wall. And inside, sometimes wind walls. But the sand walls, oof, they sound like they're worse than the storm wall, but they honestly are not always worse than the storm wall. Depending on your ship design, the sand walls could be practically nothing. As long as you have good steering and whatnot, you could probably make it through a sand wall with just a sail. I never tried it, but the sand wall's main thing was that they did heavy damage to engines, so you could easily lose engines, or at least completely lose function of the engines if you were to hang out in the sand wall or try to push through the sand walls with engines. Which meant not only were they the big separator between the PvP areas and the PvE areas when it comes to the normal game, but they were also a pretty hefty cost. Although the materials inside them were always worth it to go in, you might not always get in there on a good side. Sometimes you'd come right through the sand wall and be like, oh, I gotta turn around and go right back into that sand wall because there's a ship waiting there, fully repaired, stocked up, and ready to blow your load. Blow your load? Blow its load into you. aka unleash its cannon fodder all over your ship side. But yeah, to combat all of these different things, many people would design their ships to be able to handle all these things, such as the metal ships with all the engines on the inside and a compartment where it was easy to access, on top of having sails just in case anything were to go south. Then you have the behemoths. The behemoths were the most upgraded, basically. People would find the best materials, they'd redesign their ship completely from these best materials, and it'd be the hunkiest, chunkiest battle-born ships you've ever seen. Eventually the game got updated, and they started adding these things, which was probably one of its downfalls in the long run. These things were called, I don't remember what they were called, but they were basically corrupted, like corruption storms. They were little spaces of storm that would travel around, pretty much invisible to the naked eye, except for when you got close to them. When you got close to them, everything would start turning red. And that redness meant that you were about to lose your fucking ship. This corrupted storm rolled right in on people who are just trying to repair stuff after heavy battles and completely eat their ships. It does heavy damage. It did heavy damage to hull, everything. It would literally strip a ship down to its bare components, so much so that you would literally have just the frame left, pretty much, in some cases. Other cases you get lucky and you wouldn't get as hit by it if you got hit at all. But yeah, these storms were the death of many, many good ships. You'd think players would be the worst part, but no, players are not always the worst part. A lot of the time it was exactly as I just said. But yeah, that's basically the basis of it. A while back, the servers were shut down, and the game was pretty much doomed to be an eternal failure, I guess. Here's what I think. I feel that Bossa Studios should take another shot. They still have all the server information, I'm sure. They still have all that access. I think they should bring it back. Maybe give it a fresh new coat of paint, little upgrades to the graphics, or leave the graphics right where they were. Graphics weren't really a big thing. But if anything, they should put maybe a little bit more effort into mainly not the maps themselves, but mainly the marketing, like explaining how this is a world that has itself creation, like creation by the community. Put a heavy effort on the fact that this is a community-driven thing. And maybe, just maybe, we can get them to reboot the game, basically. Because it was a great game. For what little there was to the game, I had a blast enjoying it. I have, if I'm going to put up an image here, I have 139 hours in this game. I don't have anywhere near that in most of my games. So the fact that I put 139 hours into this game tells you how good it was of a game. It really deserves a second chance, I believe. It's one of those games that was so good and yet went so under the radar that they could easily bring it back. It would be nice to see it back. Alright, I'm gonna, just before I sign off, I'm gonna bring up a map here on the screen. Technically, there's a map. This is one of the alpha maps of the world. I was wrong. There are 4 zones, or there's 4 types of zones. There's the storm wall covered zones, there's the wind wall covered zones, there's the sand wall covered zones. Basic zones are where you spawn in, and then there's tier 2, which is ones you can go through wind walls to get to, and then tier 3, storm wall, tier 4, sand wall. All the storm walls blocked off every major entrance into the tier 3 areas. So if you want to go into a tier 3 area, you had to go through a storm wall. Tier 4 area is always surrounded by sand walls, except for inside the zones themselves. If you're in a tier 3 area, you'll be able to go right through wind walls into tier 3 areas. The only way to leave tier 3 areas is either through a storm wall or through a sand wall. So yeah, that's something. Also, there were void walls, which was just basically the edge of the map where it'd look all black and would either destroy your ship or push you back in bounds. So yeah, it's interesting. I feel strongly that we should get them to bring back Worlds Adrift. That's my personal opinion. Whether or not we get that to happen, I don't know. That depends on the community. It depends on the people who watch this, community. We strive. Give them the support to bring it back. Let's do this, people. This is your boy, CYM99, signing off. Peace.